I was in the USAF stationed in Omaha in the late 80s. At the time, I hung with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy. My roommate's name was Tracy. The girl we hung in with name was Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought we were lying, and being the silly teenagers we were, we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving, and she had a bit of a lead foot, and must have been going too fast because before long, a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on his lights. Stacy immediately pulled over. By the time the officer made it to her window, she had already had her license and registration in hand and the window down. The officer looked at her and then looked at me and Tracy. Then he said, "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off or you all will be going to jail." He then went and got back in his car. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and talking amongst ourselves, wondering why he just didn't take Stacy's identification and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a few miles, then exited the highway. He drove a little ways and turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by stalks of corn. We all stopped talking as we became more alarmed. However, being young, scared, and since he was a police officer, we continued to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and pulled into an area that had a big beat-up old barn. As he stopped and we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point did we realize we were in mortal danger and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at me and Tracy and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car and he motioned her to get in on the passenger side. She did. Tracy and I were crying, and as the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us, we began quietly praying for God to protect the three of us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt and somehow they would let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car and ran back to the car and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically, so of course Tracy and I began crying harder. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true all y'all are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where y'all came from. I better not see y'all again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As she drove back toward the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head no. She wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got in the car, she offered the officer her identification and told him she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked her, "What are you doing with those two Instarotisk words?" Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. He then told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she also had given him her military ID. He asked her if we all were in the military, and between sobs she said we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him off at AFB. He then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there after Stacy told us what occurred, I think it hit all three of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed over a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years. All of the what ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were. was a highway patrolman for 20 years, and I've seen it all: high-speed chases, gunfights, and near-death encounters. But nothing compares to what happened in the summer of 2018. It was the graveyard shift. The stillness of the night had a way of amplifying every sound, every shadow. Most nights were the usual mix of speeding drivers and DUI stops. That night started no differently. I was stationed at my usual spot near mile marker 62, radar gun in hand, coffee thermos perched on the dash. The radio buzzed with routine chatter. Then, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee, dispatch chatted in. Any available units near Route 18, we have a 10 to 90. I was confused. I'd never heard that code before. Dispatch, this is Unit 504. What's a 10 to 90? Silence. Dispatch? No response. Just static. Seconds later, coordinates popped up on my patrol car's computer. It was an isolated patch off the highway, deep in the woods. Uneasy, I radioed my supervisor. Hey Sarge, dispatch just paged me about a 10 to 90. What's the protocol? His response was curt. Ignore it. It wasn't meant for you. Seriously? They gave me coordinates. Drop it. 504. Get back to work. I hesitated, but orders were orders. The night dragged on with routine stops. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion hit, so I pulled into a donut shop. Yeah, I know the stereotype, but sometimes you just need the sugar rush. The shop was a dive, peeling paint, flickering neon sign, but it was open. Behind the counter stood a man so pale he looked like he'd been carved from marble. His fingers were unnaturally long, and he moved with a stiffness that gave me the creeps. What'll it be? His voice was raspy, like dead leaves rustling. Just coffee, and a couple of glazed. He slid my order across the counter without a word. His gaze lingered on me, unblinking, as if he were memorizing my face. Long night? He asked, his lips curling into a faint, unnatural smile. Yeah, graveyard shift. Never gets easier. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Be careful out there. You never know what might be lurking. I left in a hurry, the bell above the door jangling behind me. I was halfway to my car when the radio crackled again. Help me. The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. I froze, my heart hammering. Dispatch, this is Unit 504. Did someone just broadcast a distress call? No response. I tried my supervisor. Nothing. Curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I punched the coordinates into my GPS and set off. The drive took me 45 minutes deep into the highway forest. The road narrowed until it was barely more than a dirt path. My headlights cut through the thick darkness, revealing gnarled trees that seemed to close in around me. When the GPS announced I'd arrived, I was in the middle of nowhere. I stepped out of the car, gun holstered, flashlight in hand. The silence was unnatural. Not a single insect, not even the rustle of leaves. I radioed again. Dispatch, this is 504. I'm at the coordinates. What's going on? Static. I took a step forward. The ground was hard beneath my boots, but I couldn't hear my own footsteps. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Then, behind me, a twig snapped. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing. Who's there? I called, unholstering my gun. The radio crackled to life again. Help me. The voice was deafening, as if it were screaming directly into my skull. I dropped the radio, clutching my ears. Before I could react, a heavy blow struck the back of my head, and everything went black. I woke up tied to a tree. My hands and feet were bound with rough rope, my head throbbing. The air reeked of damp earth and something metallic, blood, maybe. 3 hooded figures stood before me, their faces obscured. They whispered among themselves, their voices low and guttural. One stepped forward. "Why did you come here?" I got a call. A distress call," I stammered. "Why are you here?" the figure repeated more forcefully. "I was just doing my job. Look, killing me won't do you any good." They whispered among themselves again, then one of them nodded. "Let him go," the leader said. Another figure stepped forward, cutting my bonds. My legs were weak, but I managed to stand. "Take your gun. Leave. Do not come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my weapon and stumbled back toward my car. My head swam, and my limbs felt heavy, like I'd been drugged. As I made my way down the path, figures began emerging from the shadows, dozens of them, their faces pale and featureless. "Don't come back," they chanted in unison. "Don't come back." I reached my car and sped out of there, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. The next morning, I reported everything to my supervisor. He dismissed it as exhaustion-induced hallucinations and put me on paid leave. But I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me. I kept one of my radios as a memento of my time on the force. Sometimes, late at night, it crackles to life. "Help me," the voice whispers. And sometimes, it calls my name. Tonight, I've made up my mind. I'm going back. I don't care what's waiting for me in those woods. I need answers. Wish me luck. My company used to have another office in another state that was 2 states over. Most of the time I flew there, but sometimes we would have equipment or vehicles that needed to be delivered. In those cases, I volunteered to make the trip and would stay at the other office for a week at a time. Sometimes I would take a rest stop at a motel, and sometimes I would break up the drive by pulling over to a rest stop and sleeping in the back of the vehicle for a bit. One time, I was driving a big box truck, like the kind you would rent at U-Haul. We had bought the truck used, and the back of it was filled with equipment and stuff from that office. I offered to make the trip. Unfortunately, the morning I was scheduled to take off, there was a delay. Something I needed to take in that truck, I think it was a big copier machine, didn't arrive until almost 3 p.m. After loading into the truck and getting ready to take off, I knew I was going to hit rush hour traffic, so I opted to delay my departure for 2 hours. That way, it would be after 5. Even though there was still lots of traffic, it would only be local in the vicinity, and once I got out in the open, it was pretty much a straight shot until I reached the state line. Having to pull over a couple of times for fuel and restroom breaks, I got into a rural area north of my state after midnight. I pulled over one last time that night for fuel and coffee. The next stretch was going to be very dark and desolate, so I was preparing myself. I knew there was a last rest stop near the border, so I pulled over there to use the restroom, stretch my legs, and maybe rest a few minutes before moving on. When I pulled up to the rest stop, it was empty. It was somewhat well lit, and since I was in pretty good shape, I used to box. I wasn't too worried about my safety. I went to the restroom and washed up a bit. But when I came back to my truck, there was a pickup truck next to it, and a guy was standing there. He started to make small talk, then asked me if I was having any mechanical problems with my truck. I thought that was odd. Why would that be his question? I got back into my truck and took off. After that point, there was a long stretch that was mostly forest. It was kind of creepy, driving through it at 3 a.m. Up ahead, there was a long bridge. Having driven this route before, I knew that under it was a gorge with water. All of a sudden, all the lights in my truck turned off. Headlights, instrument lights, even the running lights. I tapped on the brakes and looked behind me. Even the brake lights seemed to be out. Thankfully, it was a moonlit night, enough for me to gauge what was ahead of me. I was more angry than panicked, so I slammed my fist on the dashboard and yelled something like, "Damn truck!" It was a Fonz move because suddenly everything came back on again. I drove on, looking for somewhere to stop, a gas station, a motel, a shopping center, something, but nothing was in sight. I remembered a gas station I had stopped at another time, in a city about 10 more miles up the road. I made it to that gas station and noticed that shortly after I pulled in, that same pickup truck with the guy showed up. He wasn't pulling up to the pumps, though. Suddenly, I got this chill. Did this guy do something to my truck? I started to put some fuel in the truck, thinking about my next move. Just as I was about to get back into my truck and move on, a cop car pulled into the station. I waved at it, got out, and made some small talk with the officer. I pointed back in the direction of the street where that pickup truck had pulled over. After I did that, the cop drove off. I think I asked the officer about the road conditions and whether there was a motel or something ahead. When I got back into my truck, I decided that if that guy had done something that might disable it, I'd better pull off for the night. I kept looking behind me to see if the truck was following. I think it was, but I couldn't be sure. I made it to another town, a bit larger than the one I had left, and there was a motel. I found a motel next to another gas station and checked in. I locked up my truck, grabbed my bag, and kept looking around me, expecting something to pop out. I got into my room and tried to sleep, but I kept looking out the window. I only slept a few minutes at a time. Then, by full daybreak, I checked out, ate breakfast, and headed back on the road. I eventually made it to my office and asked them to have the truck looked at by a mechanic. I told them the issue. They reported back to me after I was home that the mechanic found nothing wrong and they never experienced the same issue again.